Okay, this is like round 4. Okay, round 4, Fearless Friday, number 63, The Yellow Pill. Live with me, Barry Sherry, your host, and on Fearless Friday, we talk about everything fear related, and the current topic of the season is human trafficking and child exploitation. And so we have a guest here that's trying to get on live right now to talk about her survivor story, being someone who was trafficked and did endure child abuse for a very long time. And I have been trying to get her on live through Zoom and through Facebook, and it's just not working just yet. So we're hoping that this time around it will work and my phone doesn't die, because generally I don't do this from my phone, I do it from my computer, my ancient computer. Okay, here's Erin. We're gonna approve. I think it might work this time. I'm sending good juju.
Yay! 15th time a term.
Oh my gosh, I said it was like the 4th time, but it was like longer than that, wasn't it? Okay, so I'm gonna throw in some headphones so there's no reverb on the sound. And then, okay, can you hear that? Can you hear me? Do I sound like a robot?
No.
No. Okay. Okay, it's still not coming out as clear as I want it to be, but that's okay. We're gonna just ride until until it doesn't work. We'll just keep riding. So Erin got connected to me through a friend of mine who is a martial arts master, and Erin is also into the martial arts. And before she was into the martial arts, she went through a very intense experience in her lifetime, being someone who was trafficked and part of ritual abuse. And so I'm just going to give you the floor. Whatever comes out that you'd like to share, please do. And then I'm sure I'll have some questions.
Done, it's cutting out again. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay. It's been something that has gone on, for ages, generations. And, it's kind of, people have traded in children, since the beginning of time. Now, what's happening is that I think a lot of people have a hard time because some of the stories are so horrific and we can't imagine, and we don't even want to imagine what some of these children go through. And then on the flip side, sometimes society can take the other knee-jerk reaction, like, whether it's the Epstein thing, and end up being on a witch hunt. So it's finding the balance in between. But I think one of the biggest shifts in consciousness that we're having right now is that people are now willing to hear. Where back when, it started with me in the 70s, and then I left home at 16. And, the story didn't end there. It was just constantly being harassed, constantly being watched. It was, it was a very scary time. But even counselors back then didn't want to believe me. It's like I believe you believe this is real. Anytime I would go say anything, and then it's like, well, that just sounds too weird. It's like something from a movie. But now, as we are seeing, also back in the, even as early as the 90s, the FBI's official stance was there was no such thing as organized child pornography rings. And then a bust called Operation Candyland or Candyman, something like that, happened back in 2002. And that's when it started to, it's like, wait a minute, no, this was a very organized child pornography ring that I believe that it circled in Dallas, and they spread out, they followed money and started finding people. But a lot of the people that were arrested were people of power, and they never, they got off scot-free. The people who were not as, high up the social food chain, now those people got the book thrown at them. But still, it just kind of got buried. And so this is something that's very real, and it happens to, everybody looks at, some of the rich kids growing up. Well, it happens to them too, except the rules are different for them. There's only certain people that can play with the kid, with a kid of privilege, and and to be able to do certain kinds of harm takes somebody giving the okay for it. Where other children, anything's fair game, and I think we've got everything from any age of child. And back in the 80s, it became aware of white slavery, because a lot of the blonde-haired, blue-eyed women were getting abducted and sent overseas. So I mean, it's kind of been blips on the radar here and there, but it's been shoved under the rug. And now we've got this big major thing that blew up with all the Hollywood scandal, and people are just wanting to chalk it off as another conspiracy theory. Well, it's one of those things. It's somewhere in the middle. It's when you get people like that involved, not everybody that that's in Hollywood necessarily participated in it. So now everybody's kind of almost going to the other extreme of now everybody's guilty. So I think the key thing is just getting down to the truth and really listening to the voices. But most of the survivors have been so conditioned and been chalked off as crazy, or chalked off as this, or chalked off as that, and and it's hard to prove, so that makes it exceptionally difficult. You're not going to, especially with the high-end people, you're not likely to find the videos, and you're not likely to find the evidence, and that's and it just keeps going and going and going. So it's, when I first saw some of this coming to light, and especially some of the big name people, it's on one hand I was really happy. On the other hand, it's kind of nerve-wracking, because it's like, how did somebody get that far? Because they've been so good for generations of hiding this crap. And there's always been the running joke for years, whether it's priests or politicians, about the little girl, the photos of the little girl that somebody uses against them. So it's like society has had a common knowledge, but yet we don't want to hear the story, especially as gruesome.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is. It's like, we know it's present, but we just don't want to have a conversation yet. And that's why conversations like these are so important. I know before, while we were like trying to get on and like trying to make it happen, you were talking about how when you went through your experience, it was like a little, it was still under the radar too. Like it didn't seem like anything was wrong, but there was still something wrong. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was, it was like, I'd be taken out of town and, taken to other handlers, so to speak. And I never knew, what was going to happen from one day to the next. And on one hand, it was, people can be really, really twisted, because on one hand, it's like grooming, like, for somebody who comes from, certain, prominent families, the children that get trafficked in those families, it's you're not only being abused, but you're being groomed to basically take over when you grow up, and to keep this momentum going. And and one of the things that I was always told is that, well, if you don't stick with the family, you'll never be successful at anything. And it just it just really played in my head, into the mind games that they would play, and the sleep deprivation, and the just and they couldn't leave a mark, so it was visible. So the torture would be things that wouldn't leave bruises, like dislocate a shoulder, just pull your toes out with pliers and out of socket. They might swell a little bit, but nobody's going to see anything. And so, as a, and then, it's connected enough. There was a lot of doctors and lawyers. So, if I needed a doctor, that wasn't going to go on record. Any injuries? So it's no way to prove it. And one of I think the biggest cases to me that is probably a good example, and I would almost guarantee has been through the same thing, is Britney Spears. And she was, because if you don't play along, and it's like, well, then let's make you crazy, or make you look crazy, because nobody's going to believe you. And then what are they going to do? They're going to sign you over to somebody who is wanting to keep the secret. And that does go on a lot more than we think. And then when you look at the different classes of children, for the child trade and everything, they're going to be looking into kids that aren't going to be noticed, kids in poor areas, and they would be shipped all over the country and all over the world. I knew another girl that was trafficked by, basically it worked like three rings. You had an inner, outer, or inner, middle, and outer circle, depending on where you were as far as class. So your inner circle, of course, is going to be your prominent names, and your Clintons, these kind of, and then your middle circle is going to be kind of your upper middle class, and but they're not privy to absolutely everything, because a lot of it is about money and it's about power. And some of it too is for some people who are in the more cult aspect of it, it's that belief of that they make themselves more powerful by stealing the power of the innocent. And and that's an old thing that goes way back to the old Black Pope, of that belief, that old archaic belief that, okay, robbing the innocence of a child gives them more, power in the world. And then when you get to the, the outer circle, the poor kids that they referred to as chattel, then those kids, like I said, be shipped all over, and some of them in the sex trade, some of them were sent to child hunts. There was actually a news story about some rich people that were busted, that were hunting children, like a lion hunt. And that actually did take place. That news story miraculously disappeared shortly after it aired. And so, I've seen a lot of that. And that's, and that's just, it's hard to believe that it happens here, but it happens all over the world. And it just here, it's like we don't want to see that, and we don't want to believe a survivor of that. And then a lot of times it's like people don't know what to say to you. They don't know how to act around you, and then it's like, well, or but I think the hardest thing is when the people that you were trying to get to help you, it was too much for them to help, just to even hear the story. And that's really hard, especially when it came, to a therapist. I was fortunate later that I did find a therapist who had actually dealt with other survivors, and she, her and her husband were huge. They helped me put my life back together, and and what was really sad is they were like, "This isn't the first time we've heard this exact same story that you're telling us," and from the exact same families, some high-end families. So, and again, that's not to say that everybody who is in a position of power or everybody who has money or is famous, not everybody is a child trafficker. But it is a lot more commonplace. When you've got, as a little girl, I remember one time of being down in a room with a bunch of military guys playing war games, passing me and another girl around the table. And, if that isn't organized, what is? And, and they were communicating with, other people out of state, from the state I'm from other states all over. So, it's just, it's something that's very, very real. But I think it's able to stay in the shadows too, because most victims are too afraid to speak out, and for good reason. It's back in like around 2000, I had a run-in with the family, and it was like two people tried to abduct me from a parking lot. Then later tried to kick in my back door. My phone was tapped. I had all kinds of harassment, and that was as an adult after I had already gotten out on my own. So, it's a really hard thing to bring light to and bring credible light to, because for instance, with my story, I ended up talking, going to the FBI, and the first thing I had to tell them is, I can't prove anything, but I can tell you this, and follow the money. And, and that was when I'd seen on the news, there was a couple of prominent attorneys that had been arrested, and they were asking kids from the 70s to come forward. And at first I wasn't going to. But then I'd been harassed and everything enough that I finally said, I don't care. And I don't want this karma on me. But, and I didn't think anything would come of it. But, it wasn't too much long later that, it looks like they had followed the money, and they were, there were more arrests that were made. But typically, again, it was not any inner circle people that got rounded up in that. And that's what I've seen in all the, the, any of the bus going on, is that, your elite are not getting pulled in.
Yeah, it seems like a big multi-layered web. And there's like a centerpiece, and that centerpiece somehow stays protected in some way. And that centerpiece stays protected by the billions of dollars they have, because the more money we have in this world, the more protected we are. And so it's just interesting for you to hear this, because one of the most poignant things I said was, I can't prove anything. I just have a story to share. And I literally had a pseudo argument with someone who was like, can you prove this? And I'm like, I listened to the voice of survivors. Yeah, that's enough proof for me. I don't need the media to tell me that this person's story is true. Mm-hmm. And so thank you for sharing that, because most people are so caught up in this loop of, I need proof, I need outside proof, I need outside proof. It stops us from connecting with each other, human to human. And I think that's where the trauma maintains itself, and it keeps us separate. from compassion and listening to one another heart to heart. So earlier on, you shared that it's like a grooming process, right? They want you to experience this, and then they want you to continue it. So can you talk a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, like, you know, I think one of the things is that when you look at some of these organized groups is that it's a lot of it's kind of like the who you know. So each you've got these prominent families, and the ones that are involved in the child trafficking and or ritual abuse. Not all of them are involved in both, but but the ones that are, it's like they have their little sects. This family line here, this little family line there, this or and I think now now you've got less of the old money, and now you're getting, I think they're kind of expanding a little bit. But one of the things is that each one of your branches wants to, keep their level of power. And so, and through a generational thing. So, I wouldn't be surprised, what is that Epstein's girlfriend, whatever her name was, that, if she wasn't one that was groomed from the time she was young up, she has all the telltale markers of that. And that was one of the things that, for me, when one of the leaders of our family's thing died, was I was supposed to take it over. And and that's what started everything back, was when I went to her funeral, and they're like, oh, okay, well, now you need to take your rightful place. And and I said no. I walked away from a whole lot of money. At one point I even lived in my car, but it wasn't worth it to me. And so and I'm lucky that I'm not an accident, and wasn't for that somebody just read about in the paper. Oops, something happened to her. And but that's by the grace of God. Because it's it's a very real deal. And so now I think it's going to be a hard problem to solve. When you're looking at the type of power that's behind it, and how well ingrained it is. And so it's really kind of challenging, because a lot of this is generational. So that's what's scary. In fact, there was a case, and this would have been an outer circle. What I would have been a chattel ring, is what I would call it, or what they would call it. And
What would you call it?
they my family always referred to the poor kids as chattel. They were just basically garbage. And so in that outer circle, that's how they viewed them. They're disposable, and nobody's going to care what's going to happen to these kids. And horrible things. I saw a lot of what happened to those kids, and it was the helplessness. On one hand, I was like, and I just happened to live to tell about it. And with them, you can leave marks on them. You just can't leave marks on certain people. So but this lady, she was 23 years old, was arrested, and she had been selling her children. And I had, because she was sold, and her mom sold her. That was what was normal for her growing up. And I became friends as an adult with one of the girls that would have been considered chattel, and they would chain her. The lady that handled her would move from house to house every single night. They chained her to a bed. They would make her eat her own vomit. They made her eat her own feces. And um, then she was 19 years old, and she said to me, and she goes, I want to have hope, but I don't. And and it was for her. It was both her parents. Fortunately, it's like, I did have family members that loved me. I did have some normalcy in my life, even though this was going on behind the scenes, but nobody knew. And um, everybody just knew that Erin was. At the time, I was really quiet. I was just quiet, and I was just my dad used to say to me, I could never reach you. I can never reach you. And, and as an adult, we finally told him what happened. And he just cried. He was like, oh my God, I had no idea that this was going on. And it's so easy to get away with. And so but and it's kind of sad. So it doesn't matter, you come from a wealthy family. Sometimes there's a generational thing. So this can seem normal, you know, and then even like I said, that what would be considered an outer ring, that 23-year-old woman, she just did what was normal. And that's hard for people to wrap their head around. Again, I think that's some of the horror that people don't want to hear the stories. It's because everybody wanted to demonize and crucify that 23-year-old girl. But you'd have a different perspective if you had ever seen what girls like that went through. And I was just blessed enough. Like I said, if I had no one that ever had cared or loved me, like that one girl that was my friend, and she disappeared. She got paranoid, disappeared, went back to prostitution. Last I heard, she was HIV positive, and I don't know whatever happened to her because she went underground. And but she gave up hope because for her, she had everybody in her family was involved. So she didn't even have the glimpse, I could at least have a partial normal life. She didn't have a chance. And so if I ever heard that she had a kid and she got arrested for something horrific, I would still have compassion for her. Because it makes a difference when somebody cares and somebody listens. And I had the right people along all the way. Yes, there was a lot of people that didn't listen, but there were a lot that came into my path that were sitting there going, I know this is real. I can tell, I can feel it. They could see it in my eyes. And, and then finally when, I started getting harassed and I had, roommates and other people and see what was going on. And they were like, holy crap, it really is real, So, the thing is that I really, really hope that people don't have that knee-jerk response because, when a lot of this first came out, the other thing is that to be able to discredit what's going on is sometimes people go on a witch hunt and then they're like, oh, well, look at all these innocent people that were arrested. There was a case of like a daycare that it turns out that they weren't guilty, just that, the therapist was leading them down a path because, they thought they had a hot. Yeah. And, but it is a very real issue, and it's bigger than people think, and it's a huge industry. That is a lot of money. Like the girl that was getting sold, she was her mom was getting $5,000 per man that she would send her to, and she was sending her to her as young as 5, sending her to the East Coast and to the West Coast, and she was traveling all over, and and her mom and dad were racking in the money, and $5,000, and that was back in the 90s. So who knows what it's going for now, and then depending on what you want to do to the child depends on what the price goes. So it's just mind-blowing at times, and and I've run into other a few other survivors, but typically we don't like to talk to each other because we're not sure if it's a setup. So it's like, yep, I'm dying to talk to somebody, but then I don't know if I can trust you because there's so many mind games that gets played. And so you just never know who to trust, where you go on. You get tricked a lot, especially while you're in it, to see what you're going to do. So